everyone, and welcome to TLDR Week 11. The objectives for this week is I would like you to start playing with conditionals in your scripting and work on debugging a script with conditionals. A conditional in this case that we're going to be talking about it is a basic if then else statement. Now there are other types of conditionals that you are welcome to use and play with. You can actually find some examples in your Linux Pocket Guide. We're just going to stick with this basic one because it's really common across a lot of languages, so a lot of people have probably worked with them before. Conditionals basically mean that you have choices. You have paths that you could take based off of decisions. Would you like to go right or would you like to go left? This is not the same thing as a loop because you are not being able to make the same decision over and over. If you would like to make that decision for another try, let's say you don't like the right path and you wanted to try left, you would actually have to rerun the script to be able to give that option. In the case of conditionals, it generally looks like if condition, something happens, else, something different happens. Now, what'll end up happening here is in this case, what you're looking at is a simple comparison. If the variable answer equals y, then say yes. Now in this particular case, what's going to happen is the brackets, the square brackets that you see around $answer equals y is what is actually saying this is my test condition. I have double quotes around y. If I'm going to have spaces in here, so like let's say for example, I asked somebody for their name, and in that case the name was Susie Jane Doe. Well, in that case, I would actually want to put double quotes around my variable as well as around my match to make sure that it recognizes the entire thing as my input. You want to make sure that you include the word then. That's actually a required word here. The other required words are going to be else and fi. Else is how we indicate that we are looking at a different branch. So if the answer is y, we want to take the first path, and in all other cases, we would want to take the other path. That's what the else means. The fi is how we are able to tell that the condition has come to an end. In a lot of languages, you'll see that in brackets or braces or something, but in bash scripting, we actually just used fi at the end. Now, once you start getting into some more complex things, you don't have to do this, but it is worth seriously thinking about the spacing at the beginning. So one of the things that I always like to do is rather than have everything against the left margin like this, I actually like to move things over a little bit so that I can really quickly and easily see, do I have my if? Do I have my else? Do I have my fi? And for a single if statement, that is helpful but not required. But once I start getting into nested if statements, where I would have if statements within other if statements, that can actually be really helpful for readability. I can do different types of string testing or string comparisons. Let's say, for example, I wanted to ask you a question, do you like ice cream? Well, if you like ice cream and you say yes, then I would do a string comparison. Does the answer equal yes? If the answer equals yes, perhaps I would like to have a follow-up question. Is chocolate chip cookie dough non-dairy your favorite? If the answer is yes, then you get a smiley face. If the answer is anything other than yes, perhaps you get an unhappy face. And that would be an example of a nested if statement. I can actually do other types of comparisons with if statements. I can do things like have numbers compared to a value. So I could have something like my variable compared to the value 5. Now in this case, I'm not going to use an equals sign. Equals is only for string comparisons. In the case of numbers, if I wanted to say, does my variable equal 5, I would actually say dash EQ. If I wanted to say, is my variable less than or equal to 5, I would say -le. And you can actually see that in my PowerPoint here. We also have the ability to do file tests. We can do things like if a file exists, if this is actually a directory. And these different file test operators are another function that we can end up using the conditionals for. If file is there, maybe I want to do something, and if it's not there, maybe I'd like to do something else. And there are some examples in your pocket guide if you would like to have a more specific and concrete example. I will say that this is where you're probably going to have to do some more debugging and a couple common mistakes. You have to be careful about spacing. This is going to be one of the more picky languages to do spacing in. You have to pay attention to spacing, not just between your words, but the spacing that you use between, say, the brackets of the conditional. If you don't say if space bracket space variable, that's actually going to end up giving you some problems. So you want to make sure that you're paying close attention to your spaces. You also want to make sure that you're using the right type of conditional. If you say something like if variable equals 5 and instead of using -eq, you used an equal sign, it's actually going to give you some issues. So you want to be careful of that. And then the third most common mistake that I see is the closing FI, people forgetting that. Now, it is completely true that technically you can do an if statement by itself. You could say if, then do whatever, FI, and end it. For the purposes of this class and this practice, I would like you all to make sure that you have an if and an else. The else is a really good catch-all to make sure that you haven't forgotten anything. For the assignment this week, you're going to be writing 2 scripts, a knock-knock joke and an adventure story. In the case of the knock-knock joke, you have to make sure the user is giving the correct answer at the correct spot. So this is actually going to require a nested if statement. Let's say we have the knock-knock joke about oranges. Knock, knock, who's there? Orange, orange who? Now, if the person that is playing this game doesn't say orange who, we want to make sure that we kick them out of the joke. Because if you have a knock knock, who's there? Orange. Look, it's a cow. That's not going to work as well when we're talking about trying to tell somebody a joke for the most part, unless it's an interrupting cow joke, which is a completely different thing. So you want to make sure that you're using a nested conditional here so that they are giving the correct input in both places that they need to. For the choose your own adventure story, you need to have at least 2 if statements that are nested. You can choose to do more, but at minimum, you must have at least 2 that are nested. You can do it really simple. The best example that I usually see that's the easiest to implement is something like a dungeon crawler. Do you want to go through the door to the dungeon or run away? If they choose path A, go through the door, then they would have another path in front of them. You see a skeleton, do you want to fight the skeleton or run away? If you choose A, you fight the skeleton, something else happens. But in the cases of run away, you probably want the adventure story to end. You want to make sure that you include endings for these. You can also draw out little diagrams if that's helpful to you. There's also an example of the adventure story at xkcd.com. It's his comic 1350. If you have any questions, please let me know.